Hello Year 7, welcome to your first remote RE lesson. Something to just make clear at the start, even though I will be narrating and filming these videos for you, any communication regarding the lesson or any work needs to be submitted to your normal RE class teacher. So, we have spent last term looking at some creation myths. This term, we are going to be focusing in on the life of Jesus. Now, you will all be aware of who Jesus was and how he is viewed by Christians. However, we're going to be looking at the figure of Jesus, not just in terms of how Christians view him in their faith, but how Jesus is represented in other religions, what historical arguments or evidence there are believed to be that a man called Jesus may have existed, and equally, what is it about Jesus that has made him such a prolific and influential figure, whether you believe in the Christian definition of him or not. As always with our RE lessons, we know that we are exploring these religions from an academic and intellectual point of view. We know that we will always endeavour to be respectful of what other people believe, whether they are someone that holds a specific religious belief or whether they are somebody who is undecided or in fact an atheist in that they have no religious beliefs. But as I've spoken about to my own class, RE is an incredibly essential and important lesson in ensuring that we do not allow ourselves to go into life being ignorant of what other people believe and why. So last term, we looked at the word heathen. I would like you to recall or attempt to recall what a heathen refers to, and then think, if you were a Christian, who or what types of people may you view as a heathen? And heathen is quite an old-fashioned word. It's not necessarily one that's used very much today. So I'd like you to pause the video, please, and have a go at answering that question. Now, our new word today is radical. We're going to be thinking particularly in the context of a person that might have radical beliefs. So if you would like to challenge yourself, you may want to pause the video now and think about the question. Can you remember any radical parts of the creation myths we studied? If you'd like a little extra help, you can continue on and we'll look at the definition. So radical is an adjective. It's used to describe a person or group whose views and beliefs are extreme compared to the normal views and beliefs of that society. So someone with radical beliefs is someone with beliefs that doesn't necessarily fit into the way most people think. For example, the group Extinction Rebellion, the environmental protest group, are viewed as extremist, radical groups. And that is because they are calling for huge governmental and society and global reform in almost every aspect of people's lives in order to prevent what they believe to be an upcoming environmental disaster that will essentially destroy our way of life anyway, and that we are running out of time to do. So some people partially agree with their beliefs. Some people agree with their beliefs but don't agree with their methods, and they've used some quite radical methods in order to protest, gluing themselves to various transport, stopping traffic in big cities, for example. And some people view them as akin to extremists and even terrorists. So someone with radical views, that doesn't make their views wrong necessarily, or in all cases. It means that they believe something that isn't necessarily believed by most people in society. And history is full of people who held radical beliefs, and if you look at the story and interpretations of the figure of Jesus, whether you believe he was the Son of God, whether you believe he is in fact a legend on the same level as someone like King Arthur, or whether you believe that he probably existed and was just a man, he is someone known for holding what were considered at the time to be very radical beliefs. And it's that element of the life and story and lasting impact of Jesus that we're going to be focusing on in this unit, as well as exploring this idea of groups of people that have radical beliefs, and as always reflecting on our own belief system as well. If you would like to aim higher, you may consider what people or groups of people would we consider radicals in our society today. Now, I mentioned how some people would view Extinction Rebellion as a radical group. Can you think of anyone else? And remember, this doesn't have to be who you personally think are radical, how some groups may be considered radical by certain types of people. So you can pause the video now, and please do give yourself a good few minutes to actually have a go at really thinking about the answers to these questions. So typically Christians or traditional Christians would view anybody who does not believe in the Christian faith as a heathen. Remember, heathen is very much a word used to describe people with sort of pagan or atheistic beliefs. So there are lots of very radical parts of the creation myths. And for those of you that sent the creation myths to me, I absolutely adored reading them. They were really beautiful and fantastic and sounded like the opening to epic fantasy novels in many cases. So, you know, things like there being a divine cow, people being birthed from eggs, a genderless god that splits himself into male and female seems to be, in my class, one of the more popular sort of radical views. People murdering their parents because they're stuck together in the sky because they love each other so much they won't part. So part of the interesting thing about studying creation myths is they do have some quite radical, quite unusual aspects to them. My goodness, groups of people that would be considered radicals. Obviously, with more negative connotations, we have terrorist groups. We would consider people with far right or far left beliefs, potentially radicals, animal rights activists. Some people may consider as having sort of radical views. Even some people view the idea of vegans, people who choose not to eat meat or dairy, as being radical in their view. So the way you view something as radical is very much about your own personal belief system. So our knowledge goal today is to explain how different groups of people view the figure of Jesus. So we're going to be thinking about, firstly, defining the idea of how we view a person as being radical and digging really down into what that means. What historical evidence some historians believe there to be for the existence of a man called Jesus, the idea and concept of him being the Son of God, and the Christian interpretation of his figure is a matter of belief, as with all religions, as opposed to historical fact. And we're equally going to be thinking about what do Christians, Muslims and Jews believe and interpret about the figure of Jesus. Because as with Christianity, Islam and Judaism, what is fascinating about the three religions is that they do share and cross over multiple aspects. So in true English teacher style, we're going to begin with a poem. This is a nifty little poem that I discovered many, many years ago by a fabulous she's Palestinian author who grew up in Scotland. So she is a poet who very much deals with this clash of sort of different cultures, if you like. So I'm just going to read this poem to you. You're going to pause and just consider a couple of questions. Outside the door, lurking in the shadows, is a terrorist. Is that the wrong description? Outside that door, taking shelter in the shadows, is a freedom fighter. I haven't got this right. Outside, waiting in the shadows, is a hostile militant. Are words no more than wavering flags? Outside your door, watchful in the shadows, is a guerrilla warrior. God help me. Outside, defying every shadow, stands a martyr. I saw his face. No words can help me now. Just outside the door, lost in the shadows, is a child who looks like mine. One word for you. Outside my door, his hand too steady, his eyes too hard, is a boy who looks like your son too. I open the door. Come in, I say. Come in and eat with us. The child steps in and carefully, at my door, takes off his shoes. So, I'd like you to pause the video and think, what is the purpose of this poem? What is the message that the poet is giving about the way different groups of people view those with radical views and ideas? This poem is called The Right Word. It's all about the different ways we interpret language. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to make some notes, have those thoughts, and then I will give you some feedback. So Darker's purpose in this poem is to explore this concept of a terrorist. Now, a terrorist is a very emotive word, and in the West, in England, Europe, America, we all would have a very stereotypical visual image and emotional association with that word. However, different groups of people would view what we would define as a terrorist with different words, and those different words have different connotations and associations and feelings. So what someone may view as a terrorist, the group of people they're from may view as a freedom fighter. So take someone like Extinction Rebellion, who are technically classified as a terrorist group. People who agree with them, or people part of that organisation themselves, would view themselves as freedom fighters. We are fighting to save everybody in the world by making governments realise that it doesn't matter what your own individual country's agenda may be, we all need to unite to do something about a crisis that faces us all. So whereas one person might view them as terrorists, another person may view them as freedom fighters. And what she does as this poem progresses is she slowly humanises this figure into a child. And this child not only looks like her child, it looks like our child, your child, the reader of the poem. She eventually invites this child into her home. And I think the reason why this poem always sort of stands at the front of my mind when I'm dealing with anything to do with radicalisation or radical views is that we always need to be aware that the way we view something isn't always the way others view something. And that's really what this poem is about. It's about the power of words and finding the right word to define a person and their views, and how the word that we pick as the right word isn't necessarily going to be the right word for someone else. And, you know, all of this is building to this idea of, again, the way different groups of people viewed Jesus and what he did. And as this unit progresses, we're going to be really looking at this idea of what is it that Jesus preached, or apparently preached in the stories. Why is it that people at the time viewed him as a radical, viewed his views and beliefs as extremists? Why ultimately was he brutally killed as a result of those beliefs? What is it that people did find threatening about those. And again, we're going to be linking that to the beliefs of different groups today. So, who was Jesus then? And like I said, Jesus is viewed and interpreted in different ways by different groups of people. Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God, who was sent to earth to spread the teachings and beliefs of Christianity, and through his death and resurrection, allow people to repent for their sins and enter heaven. Now, if you think back to the lesson that we did on the Christian creation myth, and it's what you're also going to be studying in your English lessons this week as well, we know that due to Eve eating the apple from the tree of knowledge, that mankind were cursed, both male and female, cursed with knowing sin. And it wasn't until God sent Jesus to the earth to die and be resurrected that people were allowed to be forgiven for their sins and enter heaven. So Jesus is an incredibly crucial and important and influential figure in Christianity. His teachings, as written by his disciples, who we're going to be studying a little bit further in this unit, appear in the Bible and form the basis for Christian beliefs. So Jesus is, again, one of the most important figures, if not the most important figure in Christianity, when you consider him as part of the Christian Holy Trinity, which is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, who are essentially one person, one God, represented in three different ways. Now, what has always fascinated me about religion is, and it's probably the fantasy fan in me speaking, is the crossovers. The fact that, this multiverse idea that actually different religious figures can appear in the holy text and teachings of other religions. And this is particularly predominant in Islam, Judaism and Christianity, who share lots and lots of aspects. So in Islam, the Muslim faith, Jesus is also mentioned. He is presented as a prophet of their God Allah. He's given to Mary to birth to spread the messages of the Muslim faith. So there are some similarities there. The Muslims believe that Jesus was conceived by Mary from God, this idea of the virgin birth, and that the purpose of Jesus was to spread the messages of the Muslim faith. Where the Muslim faith differs from the Christian interpretation of Jesus is that he is not believed to be the son of Allah or their God, or his sort of reincarnation or representation of God on earth as Christians believe. He was just a long line of prophets whose purpose on earth was to spread the messages of the Muslim faith. He was not the representation of God on earth as Christians believe. Equally, whilst Muslims do have similar teachings in the Quran of the sort of story of Jesus, they do not believe that the crucifixion or the resurrection of Jesus happened. That is not part of their holy text. So we have some similarities there and differences. Now, in Judaism, there are lots of links, particularly in the Old Testament, between the two faiths, although Judaism and Christianity tend to interpret this in different ways. In Judaism, they do not believe Jesus was either a prophet or the son or the reincarnation of God on earth. They do not believe that Jesus existed. This is because in the Jewish faith, they believe that there is only one single God who can only exist in one form. So the idea that God is presented and represented through Jesus on earth goes fundamentally against their belief. So despite some similarities in the two religions, they do not believe in Jesus, and Jesus does not appear in their holy texts or teachings. Now, what has always, again, been fascinating to me is this idea of how many historians disagree on the historical accuracy of some of the evidence that there was, in fact, a man called Jesus. and what a lot of historians, do find slightly ironic, is that this portrayal of Jesus, if he did in fact historically exist as white, would very much not be the case. Jesus would have been Middle Eastern in terms of the time and where he was living and existing. However, not all historians agree that the evidence that exists proves that Jesus was in fact a man or otherwise that was on earth. The main basis of the evidence that some historians believe would be the fact that Jesus, or a man called Jesus, and elements of the story of Jesus do appear in the writing of non-Christian texts, such as some Roman texts in particular. So we're looking at similar time periods of the time, people that would have witnessed Jesus or what happened to him, that he does appear in some other texts. And what these texts seem to agree on is two aspects of the life of Jesus, the story that we'll be studying: that he was baptized by John the Baptist and that he was crucified by order of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. So if in fact Jesus did exist as a man, these are the two elements of the story that some historians would say there is evidence that did happen. Now, as with any sort of ancient history and historical evidence, it's very, very difficult to know anything for sure, because obviously we're talking thousands of years ago. But there are some historians that do believe it is likely that a man called Jesus did exist. As I said at the start of the lesson, whether you believe he was the Son of God is to do with your own personal religious beliefs or otherwise. So, what I would like you to do is write me 4 sentences where you are going to be explaining how the belief in Jesus is presented through different groups of people. So I'd like you to consider Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and equally historians. If you want to use the sentence starters on the PowerPoint, that's absolutely fine. If you want to do it in your own words, that is absolutely fine as well. If you get stuck, I would suggest going backwards in the video and listening to the explanations again. So pause the video now and get that done. So what I would like you to do is either take a picture with your mobile phone and send it as an attachment to your English teacher via your Office 365 email accounts. Or if you are typing it up on your computer, you can attach the file instead. So the only thing that your normal RE teacher needs to see as evidence of your work today is your explanation of how Jesus is presented through different groups of people. So once you've completed that, you can send that through to your teacher to have a look at and give you a little bit of feedback on. So finally, we're just going to go back to that vocabulary that we looked at the start of the lesson. So I'd like you to think about the idea of a heathen and why would Jews view the belief in Jesus as heathen? Think back to what we learnt about the way the Jewish people view Jesus. And thinking back on this idea of a radical, how might different groups of people view radical ideas and beliefs? So think about how to some groups of people a view might be radical, to other groups of people it might not. As always, if you have any questions about the lesson, do please feel free to email me. It's Mrs. Chingwa, if you hadn't guessed that already. I believe there is only one of your classes that I don't teach in some capacity. So do please feel free to pop me an email if you have any questions about this lesson. Okay, and I will see you next week and look forward to receiving the work of my own class.